Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast based on writers sitting around drinking coffee and or occasional cocktails and wine and talking about anything and everything. We may use explicit language and will almost certainly drop F-bombs, but this is not the point of this podcast or the drive of the content, so on a general scale of life, consider us PG-13. There will be rants, there will be raves, there will be occasional reading. There will be conflicting creative advice driven by at least 3 utterly disparate points of view. Your hosts through this adventure are Chaz Brinchley, John Schmidt, and me, Jeannie Warner. Episode 1, Origin Myths. Gentlemen, let's talk about where we've all come from. In a literal coffee club way, our usual haunt is the Bean Scene on Murphy Street in Sunnyvale, California. I love that place. Kenny's the owner. He's always up for strange things going on. John, didn't you have a belly dance troupe thing there once?
Belly dance has occurred there. We've had readings there. He's good for that is Dance Essence, and they'll be back. But Kenny wants to have a community. As a matter of fact, though, my favorite part of the Bean Scene is that it's written into one of your stories. But that's another tale for another time.
It's actually in a couple. Don't tell anyone.
Oh.
I like our local art on the wall. People,
Sometimes.
you can buy it. Sometimes, like the baby without a mouth was a little creepy. Not judging, but we all try not to talk about it. And Chaz just made the avert evil sign in front of him. You couldn't see it, but it was very averting of evil. The back wall near the bathroom, bulletin board for anything in art, music. It's on a street with 3 coffee shops and 2 more within a 2-block radius. And coffee shops get a following. And it's based on quality of coffee combined with ambiance, baristas.
Plus, of course, the mayor. I mean, we get
the mayor.
Oh,
we
yes.
I was cycling home from a coffee club a couple of weeks ago, and a voice hailed me, Chaz! And I looked over, and it was Richard. And he was sitting outside a different coffee shop.
Oh, that's just wrong.
It was so wrong.
The nice thing about being a writer drinking coffee in a coffee shop is that you can collect random people with different viewpoints who are lovely in their own way. And Richard is one of those people, and we will talk more about him later, I'm sure.
I'm fairly sure we will, yes.
But yes, Larry went from being the vice mayor. I want to be a vice mayor, by the way. So if anybody's listening.
I have a badge that says vice prefect.
Oh, magnificent.
Thank you.
A vice mayor, but now is the mayor, and he does his office hours from a coffee shop.
From our coffee shop.
I read that
right next to our sofa.
It is ours.
It is.
I've read that a lot of writers work from coffee houses. I went looking for a name for this podcast, and I ran into a lot of coffee sources and a lot of drinking references on the right. Like Charlie Jane Anders has a Writers with Drink show in San Francisco. It's monthly. You should all go totally look it up. And I needed to find a name that didn't step on her toes or ideas, but... if there's going to be any dancing, including belly dancing on this radio, it's radio, so you can't see us, as it were, in podcast. We should invite Charlie up, though.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, she'd be a great guest.
Yeah.
So this one, John was the most hesitant at first, saying...
Reticent.
Jeannie,
am I really a writer?
I'm not a writer.
I'm not a writer. I write bad poetry. I write... MC words because I have a big voice. I write horrible theater introductions for belly dance, of all things. I can look at a person and give them an intro which will get them on the stage. Is that really writing?
I say absolutely it is. It's performance art of a different way. It's writing words, and whether you're writing words very quickly to say in your head, or as I've seen you write poetry for people on the spot and then turn around, write it in beautiful calligraphy and hand it to them, and people are utterly delighted with their gift.
That's adorable. Yeah.
Isn't it?
I'm sitting in a room here drinking with a member of the Science Fiction Writers of America, which is...
Two.
Well,
Two
and
members.
and an award-winning writer in so many forms, I can't know them all.
It's true.
I can't
You have
even
awards.
name all his nom de plume because I don't know them all. And I can go into my local bookstore And when I sit on the couch too, there are other writers there. It's fascinating. And that's another thing you highlight. There are so many different kinds and styles of writing, not just poetry and books, but publishing via Amazon, writing and publishing blogs, writers coming from illustrators, writers coming from long writing traditions and winning awards. At some point, I want to discuss the books of genies I love and the writings of Chaz that I love, and also the writings of Chaz that I hate because it's too good and it affects me too much.
This was like when I think you should read John Dies at the End, and you came back.
I can't read John Dies at the End. You evil person.
David Wong, if you ever listen to this, I think your book is awesome.
It's totally awesome, but I can't read it because I can't sleep.
It was him and his brother, basically, all in one story.
Spiders. This book is full of spiders.
Exactly. But Chaz, you've been at this the longest in terms of being professional. You know, gave up your day job to...
I've never had a day job.
Oh,
You never had a day job?
Never had a day
So
job.
your origin is you decided to become a writer.
Mythic origins. Tell us your mythic Chaz Brenchley, everyone. Mythic origins here.
So I was always going to be a writer. I remember when I don't remember learning to read. My big sister taught me before I went to school. But I remember when I was about 5, suddenly understanding that these lovely things called books were written by people and it was a job and you were allowed to do it. And ever since then, it's been number one on my list of jobs. And I went through school reluctantly and I went to university and then I decided university was just like big school and I didn't like that. So I left. And obviously I needed some sort of income. So I thought, okey-doke, now is the time to become a writer. And I remember having a very serious think with myself and deciding that I wasn't at all proud about what I wrote if I could just find something that people would pay me for. And my kid sister at the time, she was 15 and reading teenage romance magazines. And I picked one up and looked at it and thought, well, for God's sake, I can write for that.
I have a friend. I just had a story of that. I have a friend who also plays music that says musicians will play anything. His Latin motto was "I am a horror musician." So
yes,
just getting paid to do it. Yeah,
go write for money. So I went upstairs to my little portable typewriter and I wrote a teenage romance story, and I sent it off. And bless them, they bought it. £36, pounds sterling, that is.
Wow.
In 1977, which is, 42 years ago. 42 years ago next month, as it happens. I'm coming up on my anniversary. And ever since then, it's been the only way I earn my living.
And you have multiple... How does the idea of multiple names come from? I mean... First time I ran into it, it was like two ones were like Carolyn Keene is written by a bunch and Frank Dixon is a bunch of writers.
That's a different thing.
That's different.
But no, I mean, for me, I mean, there have always been people who wrote, quote, serious novels under one name and less serious novels under another. Malcolm... I'm going to forget their name. J.I.M. Stewart, a serious Scottish novelist, also published crime fiction under another name, which was Innes. Somebody Innes, I forget. But anyway, yeah.
We'll look it up and put the links in later, just so you know. Yeah.
It's a well-established protocol. But it wasn't like that for me because I grew up reading science fiction. And the people I liked best were those who would write science fiction and fantasy and the occasional crime novel. And if you're Ted Sturgeon, you wrote westerns as well. And
Sturgeon wrote westerns?
Oh, hell yeah.
I've got to go read those.
Yeah.
But moving on.
And they did it all under one name. And that's what I wanted. That was my thing. I wanted to be somebody who could do anything.
John Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath, and King Arthur and his noble knights.
Right, exactly. Only then the realities of publishing in the 80s and 90s totally mitigated against this. Do you want to pause it? Well, noise comes in. Okay, fine.
People might come in and out. It's
Yeah.
a podcast.
So yeah, the book selling industry changed the publishing industry through the 1980s. And one of the impacts of that was that it became very hard to sell different things under the same name. Coupled with that, it became very hard to sell anything at all if your name had
Associations,
right. I was trying to pitch a new series in the mid-90s, and the publishers loved it, and the first thing they did was go and talk to the major booksellers in the UK, and the major booksellers in the UK said, Chas Brenchley writes good books that don't sell.
Oh.
And you can't get over that. They won't stock it because they don't believe they can sell it. So all my pseudonyms, I think, have been an attempt to escape from the bondage of the name before.
Okay, well, so that's Ben McCallum. I read your Desdemona under, and Pandemonium, which, holy crap, is anybody, I mean, not to derail this here, but those are totally the British version of American Gods. I'm just saying. Move over, Neil. You actually have different, franchises.
I actually saw them more as Deeper Flint, Charles DeLint.
Charles DeLint?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Charlie...
True urban fantasy and the bones underneath the structures we have built on this ancient land, although he's actually in an ancient land. And it made more sense and evoked deeper archetypes. So yeah, I can see the American Gods point, but he was back to the originals in those stories.
Yeah.
Maybe. You should read them yourself and find out.
Do they have a world's biggest ball of twine sort of thing in England? Is that like a sideshow attraction at all over there?
I don't think we have that one.
Okay, or biggest gopher.
They've got the Cheddar Gorge.
We do have the Cheddar Gorge.
What's
it's not full of cheese.
Damn it, what the hell?
I know.
It's their version of the Big Ditch in America, which of course is the Colorado River's Grand Canyon. But, for things British, I just go and ask Merle on Twitter, the Museum of English Rural Life, which will give you all sorts of interesting facts, especially about chickens.
Right. John, for those not aware, John has had experimental dances with chickens that have turned into a lot of stories.
Those were not in any way experimental dances. Those were experimental chickens.
Yes, and other folks. Chickens are an ephemeral pet at best. They're
I'm
yes.
not allowed chickens.
You're not allowed. There's a lot of places don't have chickens. I had a friend who had chickens, but it turned out she respected the privacy, so it turned out Queenie was a rooster. And apparently the erring in the morning got her reported to the police and other things. So
animal control, etc., etc.
So what are do you use any? I mean, John, you're declaring yourself not. Have you read any books about how to write or where to write? Because there's about a gazillion out there.
I've held writers groups.
Yeah.
There are so many. The real key to writing is writing. The real key to art is the performance of the art. You can study in a museum all the pictures you want. They'll never be good until you paint. You can write. You can, and I can name a dozen books, but I think actually that should be a separate issue rather than origin.
Yeah.
But I'm going to name, Stephen King gets you kind of into the nitty-gritty of a man who had to write. Agatha Christie's books themselves point how she wrote books.
Yeah.
Ursula Le Guin has a wonderful book called Steering the Craft of Writer's Exercises that we used to meet in coffee houses and practice until we discovered that one of our members was a mansplainer and wouldn't shut up. And
that never happens.
Well, no, but the thing is, a group of writers will then quietly fade into other coffee houses where they can write without being talked at.
And I have a different origin story of that one. That I come from Mushland. For those of you not aware, Mushes, multi-user shared hallucinations, are login text-driven storytelling role-playing. So rather than going in and having a lot of stats and characters and bits here and there. What you end up having is you have a room. So I might say, Jeannie sat down in front of the microphone and plopped herself down and dropped her books with a resounding thud to grant attention and just raised her hands. And basically, I wrote scenes, and each one of them was like a little paragraph in a scene. And then anybody else who happened to be in the way of like IRC, and I think some of them started on IRC, could say, John crossed his arms and leaned back and said, "You look like you've had a long day." Not I, with a dismissive sniff. And basically, the better you were, the more you got into the story. And there's a lot of people who started this way. I mean, I was on a place called The Dreaming 2. One of my favorite people to role play with, which is to write stories with, he was a vampire, a Malkavian, so crazy, vampire who thought he was cured. He ran a club in Paris called L'Innocence Brisée. And his real name behind that is Jim Butcher.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, I've heard of him too. Crazy guy. And there was this beautiful scene that we had with my Mortal Plus and his vampire. In the end, he's like, "God, that was great. And thank you. This has been my swan song. I want to go make a living writing, so I can't afford to spend 4 hours of my life here online with you."
Every day.
Every day. And that was also Alexander Voynev out there played. Shannon McGuire recently admitted that she dabbled in a little mushing. Sean. So sorry, Shannon. Please forgive me.
So, my question to you, since that was your origin, do you still do that? What has replaced muds, mushes, mucks?
Funnily enough, there was something called Poddington on Slossop that I ran into.
Poddington on Slossop?
If none of you have ever seen the manners letters from Sir Charles Grandiose, those also sprang out of the Poddington Project. So the Poddington Project
we're going to need links on these.
Oh, yeah. And the compendium of manners cards alone, you'll want printed up to carry them around with you. But Poddington Project was basically a lot of writers that had been mushing, and so instead of doing it live, they just started telling unique stories of a character in the town of Poddington on Slossop, which is where I started with Three Oaks on Weir.
You did, and I wrote, I think, 2 scenes.
You did, and a few other people did too. And the problem was nobody else wanted to do it quite as enthusiastically as I did. My little tail was in here wagging like crazy, like, I want to do this. So
I think
that's,
maybe some of the people who might hear this, if any ever do, would. And I think one of the things that highlights as a format is that the world is changing. We never had an interactivity on that could now be had. So that might be something to look at in a later podcast, is to bring that world back, because I could see it as a series of an exquisite corpse on a web page.
And I cheated because that's actually I've written a couple thriller novels that I'm still farming out there, but the fantasy novel that I have, the sort of urban fantasy, historic fantasy, what do you call it if it's set in 1901? Historic fantasy novel is set
historic urban fantasy
in Three Oaks on Weir, and uses a snippet of something I wrote there and has gone out because I loved the setting. There were so many interesting things that I discovered. I rediscovered the world of 1901, Britain, which was great. For instance, here's one. Hold yourselves, guys. Did you understand the Great Beer Poisoning?
I know that.
Arsenic. Yes. Apparently, there's all of the big major bottlers bought the cheapest of hops that were dried on the cheapest of Coke, which had arsenic in it. And so as the Coke burned, the arsenic got into the hops, which was then brewed and misdiagnosed for some time as alcoholic nephropathy and other neurotic disorders. And you drink too much, and they didn't realize until thousands had died that it was beer, and some of it was that the tied houses attached to the breweries. And,
oh my God, more history to find out.
And the minute you start that, there's such a rabbit hole you can go down of. So yeah, I loved Three Oaks. I love the Three Oaks Project. If anybody who says, "Hey, I want to write in Three Oaks," I'm all for it. I think it's out there on Google's site still somewhere.
We can reset it up as need be.
But going back to what you were saying, the first thing was Chaz's wife dragged me to her writing group, which was with amazing people, the Flying Cars, headed by Catherine Carr of the Devery series, of course, and Madeline Robbins, yes, of course, Nancy Jane Moore, Cliff Winnig, Gary Kirchhoff, and Barry Kirchhoff.
Barry.
See, I'm going to say these all wrong when I'm not actually reading them in front of me. And their big thing was finishing something. They said, finish things, bring them to the group, and we'll all have a go.
Okay, so your origin story is actually a finishing story.
Yeah.
Unlike Chaz's, which our recent origin story for Chaz is a finishing school.
Yes.
Except for it's not a finishing school, it's a creator school. And that's what his Patreon's about.
Exactly. Well, I met Chaz because of his wife and dragging me into all this, and naturally we're all a bit SCA folks over here. John doesn't even remember when we first met.
I was drunk. No, I was not drunk. I was probably hungover. What can I say? But, moving on from that origin. So you have always wanted to be a writer, Chaz.
Yes.
And you have always written, because if you start in muds, mushes, and mucks, which you started, of course.
And anyone who muds or mushes starts a little bit with the role play. And once you start on role play, you realize you write it down. And how many people out there ever geeks spent hours trying to figure out their characters' origin stories, what do you think writing is, people? So I charge you that many more people are writers than really think they are.
That is blatantly true. The thing that's always puzzled me is that they're happy to stay there and not go out and sell this stuff, make it into actual stories and publish it.
Well, when I
Especially
decided,
when that's so easy these days.
Oh, is it so easy these days? It seems
Incredibly easy
impossibly
these days.
hard to me. Well, here's a topic of discussion that we have to cover then.
Well, it is. I mean, not possibly now.
yeah,
but
I'm writing down all the email things. I'm writing these for future episodes of
totally.
how to get your stuff published. And the biggest one that I think we can all agree on, we'll get more on this later, is open your arms wide and embrace criticism. Because when you show your story to your mom's going to say, oh my God, that's the best thing ever written.
Yeah, but that's not about getting published. That's about getting good.
That's true.
So
a lot of people don't worry with that stuff.
And that's, now we have two later topics. How to get published. One I'm going to also propose is how to find where in the wide world of writing you're comfortable and get published there.
Yeah, totally.
Because I have actually, in minor ways, published poetry.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just because I like poetry.
And my friend up in Seattle, Amber Nelson, is widely known in poetry circles. She's amazing.
One of my best friends in Newcastle is, I insist, the leading poet of his generation.
All right, I'm going to run it by you then. Amber told me a secret that all modern poetry has rain and pavement and the word shit in it somewhere.
That's because she lives in Seattle. You're not allowed to say.
That pretty much covers Sean's work as well. Yeah.
So
And
modern.
that's Newcastle and Seattle heard from.
Okay.
I don't know about San Jose. I don't think we have as much rain. Maybe a little more shit.
Well,
And of course, there's always Paris, the rainy city full of dogs. I think you're right.
yeah, I know. Once you get into that, it's like all modern poetry has those three elements in it somewhere. So you should all go out there and try to write a modern poem. For instance, even if it's a haiku. I walked the pavement.
Yeah, I keep trying to give up poetry.
You keep trying to give up poetry?
Yes.
Writing it or reading it?
Writing.
Really?
I have called myself an ex-poet for more than half my life.
That's a long time to be giving something up. That's as often as I've given up coffee.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't always take.
Is there a Poets Anonymous?
There needs to be.
Hi,
Yes.
my name is John.
Hi, my name is John.
Hi, John.
I like to write sestinas. Oh, John. I'm so sorry.
Jeannie, poetry doesn't have to rhyme, you know. It's just something else when it doesn't.
No, but the thing is, I mean, when I was a baby writer, I said I wanted to do everything, and that included all the forms. I wanted to be a poet and a novelist and a short story writer and da-da-da. And I was probably putting half my creative energy into the poetry. And I enjoyed it. And occasionally I got a poem published. And it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I accepted the fact that I was never going to be more than a second-rate poet.
Here's an interesting question. You guys can fire at me. When you're writing a story, it seems that you're writing for an audience of someone else. When you're writing poetry, are you kind of writing it for yourself? Are you the audience?
No, not for me. But I write poems specifically most often for other people.
Right.
I write
You
praise.
write expressly for other people.
Thank you,
Yeah.
expressly. And if not for other people, if not directed at it, not a praise poem directed at it, but the one poem of Chaz's I remember very clearly seems to speak directly to me, but I don't think I was anywhere near the focus of it. And it's your poem about petrichor.
Ah, yes. You see, this is rather my point, is that I can't entirely subsume that element to myself. Despite, I have not written poetry for publication since I was in the mid-20s. But there was, I almost genuinely didn't write a poem for 20 years. There was one, I broke down once, when I bought my first house, I wrote a poem about that, but I didn't show it to anybody. And then two of my closest, bestest friends were getting married. And Helen said, Chaz, will you be my best man? And I said, yes, what are my duties? And she said, you don't have to do anything, except I want you to read something at the ceremony. And it's going to be a short ceremony, so find a poem and read that. And Helen and Mark had met on an eclipse chasing holiday, which is a whole nother story, and we won't go there. But because they'd been drawn together by eclipses, I wanted to find a poem about an eclipse that had some kind of...
safer than chasing, typhoons or
Yes.
cyclones. Or,
Yes.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find one. Nobody had written a romantic poem about eclipses.
Not in English.
Not in English. So I did. Only I didn't want them to... Because, the one thing about their wedding day is that it really wasn't about me. So I lied to them. I said, I found this poem. It's by some name that I made up, which I maybe remember. And I read it as by that other person. And they loved it so much they had it copied and printed and framed, and it hangs in their bathroom.
Totally counts as published.
And I did eventually. About 10 years later, I confessed that I had actually written it. I thought they would have figured that out, and they hadn't.
Why would they distrust you who brought them such beauty?
Well,
There's also such a fuck ton of poetry out there. Of the tens of thousands and millions of poems, could be anywhere.
Yeah.
So, yeah, well, poetry. I used to think poetry was the gateway drug, and then short stories, and then you find out you're world building. But it doesn't work that way for everyone.
It doesn't work that way for everyone. That's more or less the way it went for me. We wrote short stories at school, and novels were something I aspired to, and never ever finished. I never finished a novel until I had a contract.
That's just dirty, and I'm jealous as hell.
I know someone who is writing 5,000 word fragments based on writing prompts from YouTube,
Right.
because he got into role playing on the Dungeons and Dragons dice level of role playing.
Yeah.
And now he's turning easily 2,000 words a week. He's turning out one of these every 3 weeks or so.
Right.
And that's
there's no
kind of
path.
amazing to me, because that's a lot of words to me. Done.
Yeah, we're written towards the bottom of the half hour here, so we're going to put some links together of a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, including totally pimping out our friends at every opportunity with the amazing things that they do. We're going to put it on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com, or you can find Writers Drinking Coffee on Facebook if you like. You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, which is a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by your hosts here. Our main web support magic is brought to you by Deirdre McGaffey-Streen, and our sound engineer and backup web spider is David Welsh. We want to leave you with just a note about writing or books at the end of every episode, and remember this year tagline, as the philosopher comedian Mark said, outside of a dog, a book is man's best friend.
Inside of a dog, it's too dark to read.